Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program. I'm Beverly Weimery from the League of Women Voters of Elkhart County, and I want to have a big welcome for our South Bend neighbors, the South Bend Area League, and all the other state leagues that are tuning in, to the Sierra Club and to the Elkhart Environmental Center, and all of our other friends. Welcome. I'm so proud to introduce well-known environmentalist Jesse Carbanda. He's the executive director of the Hoosier Environmental Council. That's Indiana's largest environmental policy organization. Jesse has graduate degrees from Oxford University and undergraduate degrees from University of Chicago. He oversees HEC's strategies and program development, legislative initiatives, operations, and fundraising. Under his leadership, HEC's efforts have focused on three core initiatives: clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and 21st century transportation system. Jesse has been designated a 40 under 40 by both the state's leading business newspaper and the region's main clean energy periodical. He's a recipient of the Holman Award for Public Policy Advocacy, among other honors. And he's well known for his passion for initiatives that protect vulnerable communities and animals. Jesse will provide a recap of the most noteworthy climate-related developments of the 2021 Indiana General Assembly, and he will outline what he sees as the top opportunities to advance state climate, and then share a few organizing ideas for all of us that are listening. So we'll have time after for questions and answers. So please, as we're listening to Jesse, would you think about questions to ask later? So Jesse, welcome.
Thank you very much, Beverly, for the invitation. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Elkhart County and to the League of South Bend. It's always great to partner with you. I am so grateful for all the work that the League of Women Voters do across Indiana. I'm also grateful for the other environmental groups and conservation groups that are represented and have helped spread the word. As Beverly mentioned, people will be hearing this presentation both by Zoom, so welcome to those who've come in through Zoom, as well as through our Facebook page. And I want to give a shout out to Jenny Jenkins, who's our Senior Special Projects Coordinator, who will be fielding your comments if you are participating through our Facebook page, which again is facebook.com/HECWeb. If you've got questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat if you are on Zoom. And if you're watching us through the live stream, don't hesitate to put your questions there. In fact, we welcome your questions there. And what I will be doing is giving a presentation, and then at the very end, fielding your questions. And again, we really welcome them. So as they come to mind, place them in the chat on Zoom or place them in the chat on Facebook if you're watching that way. So with that, I will share my screen and we will fire away. All right. Okay, there we go. So once again, the title of my talk is Climate Solutions in Indiana, Paths for Public Policy Progress in Tough Terrain. And for those who've been involved in the General Assembly in any way, either this year or any year prior, they know that it is very tough terrain. And in fact, this session was perhaps the toughest of all. And I have been involved in 14 or 15 legislative sessions, both as executive director and in my prior role at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And I can tell you this was unquestionably a very difficult one. But for those who've known me for a long time, or those who don't know me at all, I try to provide a positive perspective of where we can go forward, no matter how difficult the terrain is. And that's what I hope to do today. So for those who are not familiar with the Hoosier Environmental Council, we are focused on three aims: improving environmental health, protecting land and water, and advancing the sustainable zero carbon economy. How do we do these things? How do we achieve these big, broad goals? We do them through education, technical assistance, and public policy advocacy. The three things for you to be aware of in terms of getting quality information is please be sure to bookmark our Bill Watch page. Even though the 2021 legislative session has ended, it is still a very useful resource. And in fact, on Monday, we're going to be adding a lot of new content. So please stay tuned for that, because that content will help you be aware of which lawmakers were heroes and which lawmakers were zeros this legislative session. We really want to lift up lawmakers who've done good work, courageous lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, as well as bring the public to be aware of lawmakers who've made some really terrible decisions for the environment. Uh, our Facebook page as well as Twitter are excellent ways to stay involved in HEC on a daily basis. Bear with me as we get to the next slide. Okay. For those who are not familiar with what advocacy groups do during the General Assembly, I just wanted to list out just the array of activities that we take on, which is enormous. And we wouldn't be able to accomplish what we do were it not for an outstanding staff, great volunteers, great partners, and the public, people who respond to our calls to action. I want to start off with some key messages, which is it is without question that we lost some battles in the 2021 session, but we also won several. We also won several battles as well. And that may not be apparent watching the media with respect to environmental issues, but there is no question that we did win several victories, some of which I will touch on. The second thing I want to say is that when we think of Indiana, we don't necessarily think of a state that is at the forefront of climate action. But with that being said, there's a lot of interesting entrepreneurial work and academic work and NGO work that is geared towards climate action that is actually nationally innovative. But the more important thing to talk about in terms of scale, which is what we need to focus on when we're thinking about something of such great magnitude as climate change, is public policy. And I want to impress upon all of you that we can make policy change on climate issues, yes, here, even in Indiana. And again, that's what's going to, the focus is going to be. The third message I want to leave you with is customize your message. Even though we may be all fired up by trying to address climate change, how we talk about the policy issues that will get us to advance climate action is going to vary. And we have to really tailor our message to who we're talking to. A particular senator may really care about climate change or may care about the economy in their area, and you can draw a connection between the policy that we're advancing for climate reasons to an economic rationale. Finally, I know how hard it is to make public policy change in Indiana. I know it so well. I felt the pain along with many of you who have faced the heartache of loss in terms of public policy. But there is no other choice we have than to press forward with vigor, because climate change is such a great, addressing climate change is such a moral imperative. So in terms of what I'll be talking about, I'll briskly talk about the realities of Indiana policymaking, and then I'll talk about climate action from three different dimensions: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, fostering carbon sinks, mitigating climate impacts, and then share some concluding thoughts. Let's talk about some realities of Indiana policymaking. Once again, for those who have never been to the State House, this is what it looks like, this beautiful limestone building. And this is the inside of it. This is what the Indiana House of Representatives chamber looks like. The session is over. It began on January the 4th and ended coincidentally on Earth Day. And it was called the long session, or the budget session, because every 2 years, the budget is formulated in the General Assembly. And because it takes time to think through the budget, it is necessarily a longer session than odd year sessions, which are short sessions. This is a particularly interesting year because this will be there will also be a special session of the General Assembly that will take place in the fall, and it will be largely, but not necessarily entirely, focused on the process of redistricting reform, which I will talk about in a few minutes. For those who aren't familiar with the composition of the General Assembly, it is very, very lopsided. We have supermajorities in the House and supermajorities in the Senate. 71 to 29 in the House, Republican to Democrat, 39 to 11 in the Senate. So anyway, what we're talking about is conservative supermajorities on the order of 70 to 80%. And these are historical supermajorities. We haven't seen this type of lopsidedness in decades in our state. Let's talk also about the ideological reality of not just the 2021 session, but the 2022 legislative session. One noteworthy feature is that there is a strong resistance to local control. There have been efforts to weaken local control. Those increased in the 2021 legislative session. The other was that the legislature was rather, I would say, half-hearted in its efforts to really make the legislative process accessible to the public during the pandemic. Yes, you could testify. Yes, they had protocols in place for COVID, but there was not an opportunity, as happened in several states, to testify remotely. So those people who are really vulnerable to COVID couldn't testify remotely, even though several states had offered that provision. And that is a reflection of the fact that there is this kind of science skepticism that exists among a portion of our lawmakers in the General Assembly. Now let's focus on the heart of this presentation, which is 3 major paths to advance climate action. First, let's talk about cutting carbon. And by way of background, by the way, there's no state in the industrial Midwest that has a higher carbon footprint on a per capita basis than Indiana. So there is a special imperative to cut carbon in our state. One opportunity is to advance rooftop solar legislation. And you might say, well, Jesse, why are you starting off with this particular topic? And the answer to that is because there is a broad coalition already in support of this policy. And in particular, let's talk about what happened in the 2021 session. There were 5 rooftop solar bills that were filed. All were denied hearings, but there are 2 silver linings. One is 3 of those 5 bills were sponsored by Republicans. So it reflects a bipartisan support for rooftop solar that didn't exist 10 years ago. The second silver lining is that later this year, there will be the convening of the 21st Century Energy Task Force. And one of the topics that's going to be discussed is distributed generation, which is a more technical way of describing the type of energy generation that comes from small-scale solar, like rooftop solar, or ground-mounted solar, as well as small-scale wind or geothermal systems. So here are some things that you can do to advance this particular type of climate solution. One is to talk to your state representative and senator that you want them to support pro-rooftop solar policy, including a bills to extend net metering. And net metering is going to phase out in Indiana by July 1st, 2022, next year. And that's a bad thing because it will mean that the payback periods for rooftop solar systems are going to significantly increase, as are the attractiveness of these projects to homeowners, to business owners, to places of worship, etc. So it's so important that we talk to our lawmakers in support of public policy that extends net metering, which is what is being phased out right now, and again will end in 2022. And if you're not familiar with net metering, please drop a comment in the Zoom chat or on Facebook, and I'll be glad to talk about it in the Q&A. Another opportunity is electric vehicles in terms of climate solutions. We haven't adopted electric vehicles to the extent as some of the states out in the West Coast, but electric vehicles are coming to Indiana without question. And that's because all the major auto companies are either planning to phase out internal combustion engines, or they are planning to aggressively introduce electric vehicle models. Now, the last legislative session, there was a bill that was heard in the House Utilities Committee, and it did not advance. The heart of that bill would have been it would have authorized any investor-owned utility in the state to be able to establish a pilot program for electric vehicles. And the pilot program would have involved rebates for people to buy electric vehicles, most likely. That would have been one element of it. Another element would have been providing the authorization to be able to build charging stations so that you easily have a place to, of course, charge up your electric vehicle. And that's a critical thing to rapidly expand electric vehicle penetration in the United States is the need for abundant charging infrastructure. So the call to action here is to ask your lawmakers to support an EV pilot program, but also make sure to tell them that you really want to see an environmental justice element to these electric vehicle programs. Namely, you'd like to see rebates to school corporations, to transit agencies, so that they can buy electric powered school buses and electric powered passenger buses. And that's so important from a environmental justice perspective, because one of the persistent problems we faced in terms of toxic pollution is that we've got these old diesel vehicles that are driving through old and poor neighborhoods and exposing little kids to harmful levels of particulate pollution. So we need to really make sure that when we expand electric vehicles in Indiana, we do so with a clear eye towards environmental justice. The third opportunity is to expand utility scale renewables in the aftermath of a bill called HB 1381. In essence, this bill would create statewide standards for renewable energy. Hoosier Environmental Council is in principle supportive of that concept, that there are many aspects of renewable energy design that can be standardized that are not geographic specific, but there are some exceptions. And so while we generally supported this bill, we were not actively in support of this bill because there were pieces of this bill that stripped away local control where local control really mattered. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. This bill passed out of the Indiana House. It did not become law. And it didn't become law because 60 plus counties opposed the bill. And it couldn't even secure majority Republican support in the Senate. So no vote was held. Again, we like the concept that there are certain aspects of renewable energy design that can be standardized across the state and can probably expedite the growth of renewable energy, but there are certain exceptions to that principle. So the call to action here is to tell your lawmakers that you support the idea of statewide standard for renewable energy, but you want to make sure that they are supportive of environmental friendly solar farm design. And again, I'll be elaborating what that means in just a few minutes. Another opportunity is to pursue local climate ordinance action in the aftermath of HEA 1191. If you're not familiar with this bill, this is one of the sleeper bills of this session, unfortunately, despite our efforts and the efforts of other partners of ours. It's a very dangerous bill that's unfortunately become law. I say it's dangerous because what it effectively does is it ties the hands of local governments that want to cut their carbon footprint in a major way. Now, even with this law in place, a county or city could build green buildings, which inherently have reduced energy, but they can no longer be able to enact an ordinance that say, we no longer want to have coal in our jurisdiction, or we no longer want to have natural gas in our jurisdiction, which are, of course, the two dominant fossil fuels in the power sector. And that's unfortunate because that's a very powerful tool that we need to continue to cut carbon. And this tool has been used in other states in ways to cut the carbon footprint of buildings, which aren't achieving the kind of carbon reduction progress as we're seeing in the power sector or in the transportation sector. So once again, 1191 did become law, but the call to action here is to talk to your mayor and your city councilors to ask them to act on climate action on whatever fronts that are under consideration before it's too late. Because our worry at the Hoosier Environmental Council is that the state will step in to repeal the authority of local governments in other respects beyond the scope of 1191. And the hope is that if people enact ordinances in good time, the state will not repeal those ordinances that are already on the books. The final policy opportunity I want to talk about under reducing carbon footprint has to do with mass transit. So, all the bills that I've talked about thus far have to do with the power sector, which has historically been the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in America. But with the closure of so many coal plants across America, mostly because they are old, um, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States is actually the transportation sector, which makes it so important that we expand mass transit in America and certainly in Indiana. Now, what SB 141 was about was creating these huge bars for the city of Indianapolis to jump over, to be able to expand the city's mass transit system. And there was a referendum passed a couple of years ago in Indianapolis that would have allowed essentially the doubling of the mass transit system in Indianapolis, which is not only important for the people of Indianapolis, but for the people all across Indiana, given how much a tourist destination Indianapolis is, and when it comes to sporting events and cultural events and so forth. So thankfully, SB 141 died thanks to great advocacy. So this anti-mass transit bill died, but there is no question that other anti-mass transit bills will come up in the General Assembly in future years. And that's because there is a large faction of lawmakers who do not like mass transit for different reasons. And so it's so important to build political support for mass transit. How do you do it? Ride the bus. Um, you know, uh, ride the bus is the simple answer to that question, and share that through social media and otherwise so that people become more acculturated to using buses whenever it makes sense. And of course, when you talk to your lawmaker, and that is so important to talk to your state representative and state senator, tell them that you support mass transit. That simple of a message is something that they need to hear because there are a lot of active anti-mass transit people in Indiana, unfortunately. The second opportunity related to climate action has to do with creating carbon sinks. The most historically, the opportunity that we have shared time and time again to create more carbon sinks in Indiana is to increase funding for the President Benjamin Harrison Conservation Trust, which is authorized through the budget bill, which is always called HB 1001, and again is introduced every 2 years in every odd year session. And I realized that I misspoke earlier. Short sessions are even years, long sessions are odd years. So the status of HB 1001, the budget is, of course, it did pass, and it does include expanded funding for open spaces. That expanded funding isn't because of a change in heart on the part of lawmakers, unfortunately. It's because Indiana received federal funding, part of which lawmakers have decided to earmark towards open spaces. So it is federal money flowing in through the state, and the state making a good decision that part of that federal money should be used to expand open spaces. So we do need to give some credit to lawmakers for that decision. And what that will do is that will increase the amount of money in the President Benjamin Harrison Trust, which is the main mechanism by which we buy endangered woodlands, wetlands, and prairies. So one thing that we really need to do is talk to our lawmakers that we want sustained funding for the President Benjamin Harrison Trust. And the urgency of that has only increased because of the passage of SEA 389, which is this anti-wetlands bill that I'll be talking about in just a few minutes. I want to revisit this bill that I've talked about earlier, which again is HB 1381, this bill having to do with creating statewide standards for renewable energy. We've been asked a lot of questions about this bill because people say, well, the Hoosier Environmental Council is a very pro-renewable energy bill, and why don't you all actively support the bill? You said that you were generally in support of the bill. Why don't you actively support the bill? It all boils down to one core issue, which is the necessity for environmentally friendly design of renewable energy projects. And here's the difference in views between an environmental mindset related to renewable energy and the mindset of some solar energy developers. The shared view is that rapidly expanding solar farms is a good thing in terms of decarbonizing the power sector, in terms of reducing the carbon emissions from the electric power sector. So we're on the same page there. But there's a difference in views in the beneficiaries. The mindset on the part of some solar developers is do as desired by the holder of land rights. Our mindset is do what is in the best interests of the community as a whole. Another distinction is that a lot of some solar developers, especially the ones that are most vocal about it, say we're going to comply with our stormwater permit, and that's all we really need to do. But our mindset is let's maximize the co-benefits of solar farms. Now, if this sounds a little bit abstract to be talking about co-benefits, I'll convey my point in imagery. This is a solar farm which has turf grass underneath it. This is a solar farm that has pollinator-friendly vegetation around it. That's a massive difference. This versus this. Now let's break down the distinction in terms of benefits. Turf grass, you're going to potentially have soil loss because turf grass has shallow roots. If you have native grasses with native wildflowers as your vegetation under solar farms, you're going to oftentimes have much deeper roots, which is going to maximize soil and water conservation. And down the line, when you've got deeper rooted plants, you're more likely to control stormwater. If you've got deeper rooted plants, you're more likely to maximize carbon storage. If you've got native vegetation, you're more likely to attract native birds and bees. And those have suffered tremendous declines in America for many reasons. One important reason being agrochemicals, that we've become far too dependent on agrochemicals. So it's also superior from a wildlife habitat perspective, and very importantly, it's very significant from a community buy-in perspective. As I mentioned, we're passionate advocates for renewable energy, but we want to make sure that communities are too. And for communities to be passionate about renewable energy, they need to feel that these projects are beautiful. They need to feel that these projects truly enhance the landscape. And clearly, this is going to enhance the landscape far more than this. So for all these reasons, we couldn't be in enthusiastic support for HB 1381 because it would have stripped the ability of local governments to stipulate environmentally friendly design. And that's precisely why when you talk to your lawmaker, please tell them that you want to see counties retain the right to require environmentally friendly solar. And thankfully, and really credit to a lot of foresighted county commissioners and local area planners across Indiana, we have several counties that require environmentally friendly solar, which is sometimes called pollinator friendly solar. But we need to make sure that lawmakers have the backs of these county commissioners in supporting this type of solar energy. So I'm really happy to see questions flowing in, and please don't hesitate to continue to ask those questions. We'll be moving on to the third category with respect to advancing climate action, and that has to do with reducing climate impacts. There's no question that I want to start off first and foremost with SCA 389, Senate Enroll Act 389, which is the bill that really activated and captivated the environmental community and conservation community like no other bill. I will say unequivocally that this is perhaps the worst anti-environmental bill to pass the General Assembly. I would say with confidence that it is the worst bill having to do with the environment that has passed the General Assembly in my tenure as executive director. I have not encountered any bill as damaging as this bill. And if you're not familiar with it, This has to do with significantly reducing protections for our wetlands. Now let's zoom out for a second when we're talking about our wetlands. Pre-European settlement, almost 1 out of every 4 acres in Indiana was covered by wetlands. Because of very aggressive development and unappreciation or underappreciation of wetlands, the vast majority of those wetlands are wiped out. Only about 3.5% of Indiana's land is covered by wetlands. And wetlands provide a tremendous benefit to both humanity and to wildlife. Let's talk about that. For wildlife, 80% of the endangered birds and threatened birds in America depend at some point in their life on wetlands. In terms of people, wetlands are critical to storing water, on the order of billions of dollars in benefits to Hoosiers per year. Wetlands purify water, and wetlands recharge our groundwater. And the major source of drinking water in Indiana is groundwater. So it plays a tremendous role, often unappreciated. And unfortunately, what SCA 389 would do is it would wipe out protections for what are called Class 1 wetlands. And it would significantly scale back, reduce protections for what are called Class 2 wetlands. Those are the two core aspects of SCA 389. And we'll talk about what Class 1 and Class 2 means in the Q&A. But I just want to underscore just how devastating this bill is, affecting on the order of 600,000 acres of wetlands in Indiana. Now, the good news is, even though this became law, despite ferocious opposition from 100 plus organizations, an unprecedented level of opposition, there are several things that we can do, even though this terrible law is part of the books. One is to make sure that we are signing up for public notices on IDEM's website, which is that first link, and to monitor projects that propose to destroy wetlands in different parts of our state. Being more active as a community in being mindful of projects that could hurt our wetlands. The second thing we can do is step up our relationships with our local governments, with land trusts, with landowners to protect the unprotected, to preserve the unprotected, in other words, and to tap into new and anticipated government funding. There is going to be more funding at the state level and much more funding at the federal level that eventually will come down to the local level and could help to permanently protect some of the vulnerable wetlands that are vulnerable because of the passage of SCA 389. We should also hold the governor who signed the bill and lawmakers who voted for the bill account. We have to hold them accountable for what was, again, a terrible decision. And on Monday, we're going to be releasing a lot of information on our Bill Watch page that will allow you to hold these lawmakers accountable. We also encourage you to take your lawmakers out to see an area wetland. It's one thing to talk about a wetland with a photo or in the abstract. It's another to actually see it in person and recognize that you can see beautiful vegetation, lots of birds, and various important insects around these wetlands. So take your lawmaker there. Once you're vaccinated, once you know your lawmaker's vaccinated, take him or her out to a wetland and help them appreciate the benefits of wetlands. That's especially important because one element of 389 that's a good element is the establishment of a wetlands task force. And this task force will allow Indiana to really re-examine wetlands. It's definitely a cart before the horse situation, because what we should have done is had a wetlands task force that methodically studied the benefits of wetlands, methodically studied the current law and the current regulations, and ask ourselves, do we need to revisit it? Do we need to modify? Do we need to harmonize it with the federal law? That's what we ought to have done, and then enacted laws. What instead is we passed this drastic anti-wetlands law and then said, okay, we'll throw in a wetlands task force. Having said that, even though the process was wrong, let's make this somewhat redeeming by participating in and being watchful of the wetlands task force. And our water policy director, Dr. Indra Frank, will certainly be vigilantly following that task force as will certainly board members of ours, as well as supporters of ours, and we will be sure to provide you timely updates through social media to make sure that you have opportunities to share your voice with this wetlands task force. Another element that falls under reducing the climate impact on Indiana, climate change impact on Indiana, is making sure that there's adequate funding for something called Clean Water Indiana, which is a program that basically gives assistance to landowners, especially farmers, to create buffer strips along their farms, especially along water bodies, to protect those water bodies from runoff and to reduce erosion. And we need to be worried that there are going to be increasing risks of erosion and agrochemical runoff because there's going to be an increased risk of flooding as climate change becomes more and more apparent in the Indiana context. So we want to make sure that there is adequate funding for Clean Water Indiana. So one kind of call to action is to talk to your lawmakers to make sure that there's adequate funding for Clean Water Indiana when the budget gets rewritten in 2023. And it's never too early to share that message with your lawmaker. Excuse me. The other thing that we need to do is talk to our soil and water conservation districts, our local soil and water conservation districts, to make sure that they are maximally tapping into these Clean Water Indiana funds to protect as many of our water bodies as possible. Let me take a moment here to get a drink of water, but while I do, please be sure to ask your questions in the comments. Okay, well, it's notably that I was talking about Clean Water Indiana and getting hydrated. All right, moving on. Coal ash and factory farming are two issues that anyone who has followed the Hoosier Environmental Council knows have been major issues that we've been focused on for many years. And you might say, with Jesse, these are problems, these are toxic problems that contaminate water, they contaminate our air, but why are you talking about it in the context of a climate change presentation? And the answer is because I've mentioned before that we are going to see increased flooding and we're going to see more frequent flooding. And the thing is that factory farm manure pits and coal ash waste pits are generally located in floodplains, and they are unlined and they are uncovered. And the coal ash pits are going to be covered eventually, which we can talk about, but they still are very vulnerable to destruction in the event of a historic flood. And so there's very much a link between these issues and climate change, because again, if there is going to be increased flooding, more frequent flooding, and more intense flooding, the worry is that there could be a breach in the berms around these factory farm waste dumps and these coal ash waste dumps that could be absolutely devastating to our rivers, which again, we not only care about from an ecological perspective, but as drinking water resources. Now, Hoosier Environmental Council was very involved in helping to draft some bills having to do with coal ash, and we drafted a bill having to do with factory farm reform. Unfortunately, none of those bills got heard, but the fact of the matter is local governments can do a lot to protect their communities from both coal ash and from factory farming. And so it's so important to build relationships with your county commissioners and with your city councilors to make sure that if there is a factory farm waste pit or a coal ash waste pit in the jurisdiction of the county or the city, that they use the tools that they have to protect the community from these toxic resources. A few concluding thoughts. One is I want to underscore some points that I made earlier, which is that we do have paths right here in very conservative Indiana to make climate progress, and we need to pursue them with vigor. Oftentimes, people want to imagine solutions to advancing climate change. And of course, that's important to use one's imagination to do so, and to then channel that into entrepreneurial activities or nonprofit activities at a local level. That's very important, but we cannot take our eyes off the ball of the State House. We cannot, because that's where we can make major impact for good and to block things that can be very bad, as was the case with SEA 389. The second, once again, is to customize your message. We cannot use a climate message necessarily with every lawmaker. We really need to understand that lawmaker as well as we can and then customize our message. The third point, once again, is no matter how frustrating it is, and believe me, we share in your frustrations, we do so with a smile though, is that there is a clear and simple moral choice about how to respond to the future. Climate change is an enormous, multi-decade, multi-generation threat, and we need to do our part to address this issue with a unrelenting vigor. It's also important to be mindful of the challenging realities of the General Assembly, gerrymandering, no campaign finance limits on individual contributions, part-time legislative staff, which makes people more reliant on lobbyists, and a large portion of our lawmakers who are very ideological. They're not particularly susceptible to good research, but there are solutions to every one. And I would love to unpack these in the Q&A here because I'm looking at the time. So I'm not going to walk through this slide right now, but I would love to do so in the Q&A. Finally, organize. That is the solution to really anything that we want to achieve big in our state. We can draw much strength from the women's suffrage movement, from the civil rights movement, and so forth about the power of organizing. And I believe that if we organize with, again, complete vigor, we will prevail. With that, I will open this up to your questions, and I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to responding to your questions and comments. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, so the first question that was asked in the Zoom chat, and I will definitely look at the questions that you've posed through the Facebook chat as well, is how would rebates be funded when it comes to electric vehicles? This was posed to us by Rachel. The answer to that is frankly ratepayers, but it would be a cost that would be spread across all members of the all ratepayers. So to be a little bit more concrete in what I'm saying, let's say that up in northern Indiana, NIPSCO decides to establish an electric vehicle pilot program as authorized by the General Assembly. They could then issue rebates to people maybe of a certain income level or have some kind of stipulation of who is eligible for these rebates. And those rebates would be funded by ratepayers overall. But the logic of it is that electric vehicle owners are providing a public benefit, especially when you think about it from the perspective of an environmental justice lens, that if, say, a city changes their fleet to electric vehicles, it reduces the pollution impact that these cars are having when they're traveling through communities where people are especially vulnerable to particulate pollution. Okay, let me go to the next question. I'm going to try to tackle these as quickly as possible with an eye towards the time. Okay, we will, let's see. Rachel again poses, proper siting is key. Solar developers are after ground that is under high tension power lines. It doesn't matter what type of ground is under it, prime ag ground and animal habitats. Well, I think I'm getting your point there, Rachel, that again, siting is absolutely critical. We don't want to see renewable energy projects in migratory bird corridors. We don't want to see these projects threatening wildlife, especially wildlife that is under some level of threat, whether under federal or state law. So siting is critical, but then the design of these solar farms are also critical to start to build back the enormous amount of biodiversity loss that Indiana has endured for far too long. Okay, Beverly asks, is the Notre Dame solar farm environmentally friendly? Actually, I don't know the answer to that question about the project per se. What I can say is that St. Joseph County does have a pollinator-friendly ordinance in place. So I would venture to guess that it is an environmentally friendly design in order to be compliant with the county ordinance. And of course, because there are so many co-benefits to having this solar farm properly designed for Notre Dame students, not only in terms of reducing stormwater runoff and retaining soil and water, but also in terms of being a great educational resource for the academic community. So my sense is it is probably environmentally friendly. How do we invite the task force to um, Symington Lake wetlands? That's a great question. Um, we don't know really how the wetlands task force is going to be designed. My hope is that if they are four-sided, it will not only involve meetings that take place in the Indiana General Assembly, but it will involve meetings outside of the General Assembly in the backdrop of different wetlands, so that the lawmakers that are on the task force and the stakeholders that are on this task force can truly observe these wetlands in person. So when there's an opportunity for public comment on the location of these task force, we will certainly spread the word to our supporters, such as those on Symington Lake. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay. Okay. Um, okay, a comment from Judy has to do that she's worried that SB 389 will be the start of even more anti environmental legislation related to wetlands. Well, that is a possibility. I mean, there is a faction of lawmakers who are both very anti-government, very anti-regulation, and very anti-IDEM, which is the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So we have to be very vigilant next session and every session onward that there's a real vulnerability of more attacks on the environment. And that's why I very intentionally made the last slide focused on organizing, because the only way that we can counteract the power of ideological lawmakers is to organize in all those districts where lawmakers really care about what their constituents think and really are supportive of good research based public policy. Uh, excuse me. Um, let me keep going here. Someone asked here, John asked, does having an electric vehicle rebate mean changing the penalty on hybrid vehicles? No, those are two distinct things. We would definitely be in supportive of repealing the annual fee that is currently levied on electric vehicle owners. Now, I understand the logic of having some type of fee on electric vehicles at some point in the future, because we need to raise sustainable amounts of money to repair and maintain our roads. And all vehicles should contribute to that important social good. But I don't think we necessarily need to impose this penalty right now um, as a means to incentivize electric vehicles, because they are, again, particularly when they are driving through environmental justice areas, doing a good. They're doing a benefit for the community in terms of reduced air pollution. Okay, Mark asks, wouldn't it be better to have solar panels on individual houses than using lots of land? Wouldn't it be more environmentally friendly and less controlled by big business? Yes, I think that's true. But I guess I'll answer that in a couple of ways. One is we absolutely need to maximize the potential of rooftop solar. I mean, there's enormous amounts of rooftop solar on our homes, on our businesses, on our places of worship, on community centers, on corporate buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So there's enormous untapped capability. In fact, I believe that the National Renewable Energy Lab has concluded that there's something on the order of 20% of America's electric generation can come from rooftop solar. So it's an enormous capacity. But because there's an urgency to decarbonize, I think there's a really good public policy case to supplement rooftop solar with carefully sited, carefully designed utility scale solar. And it's really important to, again, put those modifiers carefully designed, carefully sited. So here's a good example where I think there's a case to be made for good utility scale solar. It's in a place like an old coal mine that maybe it's been remediated, but it can't be remediated to such an extent that it becomes a new nature area. And that's an area where I think we could put solar farms. So I think we got to be really careful about where we put solar farms, um, but I think again, there's a case for utility scale solar as well. All right, let me pivot to questions that we're getting through Facebook, and we have several here. Um, so, and then I will definitely get to questions that are posed by Zoom as well. So bear with me here. We have a lot. And thank you, Jenny, for all the good comments that you've been adding to our comments page. Susan on our Facebook chat said, "We are so discouraged after the coal ash bills died or got co opted into something else entirely. We've pivoted our focus to support federal legislation, HR 2396. Any words of wisdom to try again at the state level next session?" All right, thank you, Susan, for the question and for all of your advocacy for coal ash reform. For people who aren't familiar with the coal ash problem, I want to take a moment to briefly describe it. There's no state in America that has more coal ash waste pits than Indiana. And that's something to really pause and really absorb. We're the 14th largest state in America, but we're the number one state for coal ash waste pits. That's worrisome. There are about 83 of them in our state, overwhelmingly unlined, generally uncovered. Some of them will be covered as a part of the closure process. But the problem is that they serve as really dangerous sources of pollution. Why? Because we have proof from the utilities themselves that they are leaching into the groundwater. And coal ash contains all sorts of toxic metals in them, which are not good to our bodies. If they're at certain levels, they're going to be very toxic to our bodies if we ingested them through drinking, for example. So we really do need to do a far better job with respect to coal ash. And our position, Hoosier Environmental Council's position for many years, is to excavate that coal ash from these floodplains and put them in lined landfills. So one strategy to do that is through federal policy, which I assume HR 2396 is about. I haven't studied that bill, but it is supported by a very progressive, very far-sighted congressman. So I'm assuming that's what it is. But we also need to keep impressing upon our lawmakers to take action at the state level, to at least impress upon the governor's office to not approve coal ash closure plans that are in place. Because again, what that means is you are consigning these coal ash dumps to floodplains where they could be broken by a historic flood, or where they are leaching to our groundwater, which again is not safe for um, drinking water resources that may share the same aquifer as is being contaminated by coal ash waste dump. So lawmakers need to be impressed upon that they need to take action for coal ash reform. I don't know if we can pass state legislation on coal ash given the grip of the utility lobby, but it is possible that we can improve the way that coal ash dump um, procedures happen through the administrative process. Okay. Another question from our Facebook page is, why is it so hard for far-right politicians to not understand the dangers of the climate emergency? The science is clear. We are headed for a mass extinction caused by humans. Well, one thing that I like to emphasize in presentations is that we can never look in any part of the political spectrum in a homogeneous way. What I mean by that is there's a lot of diversity even within the right side of the political spectrum. And it's so important that we understand the lawmakers we're talking to try to find a path of common ground, even on a difficult issue like climate change. So some lawmakers, it may be through faith. It may be through that even if they prescribe to a very conservative theology, they can be persuaded by a kindred spirit that they have a biblical basis for needing to address climate change. And we have the president of the Evangelical Environmental Network as a keynote speaker for our annual conference to talk about how to engage conservative evangelicals on climate change. So there's one element of the right that can be persuaded to take seriously climate change. There's another element of the right that may be persuaded on business grounds, that there is an enormous economic opportunity to address climate change through a variety of different climate solutions, whether that's electric vehicles or whether that's renewable energy. So while there's definitely an element of the far right that is very hostile to climate science, that is that are obstacles to advancing climate change, it's important that we not paint too broad of a brushstroke, because there are elements of the right that are actually receptive, with patience, with time, with the right messenger. I hope that's helpful, Brian. Okay. Let's move on to, please keep those questions coming. I know we're approaching 8. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes if I don't lose my voice, to be responsive to all the questions that you've asked. So let's see what else we have here. U.S. Steel is the largest polluter in Indiana. Are they putting out more pollutants today than they did 5 years ago? I don't know that answer offhand. I can't say that Hoosier Environmental Council, Save the Dunes, a great partner of ours, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, which is my alma mater as far as environmental policy is concerned, our organizations, as well as others, I don't want to overlook others like the Isaac Walton League, the Sierra Club, Surfrider Foundation, Alliance to Save Great Lakes, all these groups have been convening to watchdog both US Steel and ArcelorMittal, which are the two big behemoths on the Lake Michigan watershed, to make sure that they are doing everything possible to reduce pollution and be accountable for their past serious pollution. So I hope that answers your question, Beverly. All right. I think I've answered. Another question was, what about solar panels that are coated with Gen X, which is a PFAS? This will be a huge concern for residents' water supply. Rachel, to be honest, I'm not familiar with I'm certainly familiar with PFAS. I'm not familiar with the chemical Gen X. So if you can drop a link to that in the chat or email us at comments@hecweb.org, we'll be sure to look into it. I would say that solar farms are very much designed to not have the type of environmental liabilities that coal plants and natural gas plants have had. So no renewable energy technology is perfect, no energy technology is perfect, but I'm not familiar with that coating in solar farms. I can say that PFAS is a very dangerous chemical. And in fact, Hoosier Environmental Council led an effort a couple of sessions ago to get a study committee on PFAS so that the public could be much more aware of its risks to our drinking water supply. Okay, thank you, Jenny, for sending me a couple of other questions from our supporters. A question from Connie: my state senator and representative are both Democrats and support the environment and public transit. What other things can I do to promote environmental legislative efforts? Well, thank you for your question, Connie. Part of it is we want to, again, be really fair-minded and recognize that there are great lawmakers on both sides of the aisle with respect to the environment. And if you're skeptical about that, please stay tuned for Monday when we're going to be releasing our list of heroes and zeros on our Bill Watch page. Excuse me. But to answer your very specific question, Connie, and let me again take a glass of water here. I apologize for. The thing is, we can't take for granted that just because we have a Democratic lawmaker, that they are pro-environment across the spectrum. We've had some Democrats in the past take some positions that the Hoosier Environmental Council would not have supported. So, number one, I think it's critical to make sure that we're briefing our lawmakers on the full gamut of environmental legislation, not just the hot button issues, to make sure that they are voting in a pro-environmental way across the board. The other thing is, again, we don't want to create stereotypes that one party is all good and one party is all bad, because again, there have been heroes on both sides of the aisle. I think another thing to impress upon your lawmaker, even if you feel like they're totally with you on the environment, is to say, not only do we want you to vote the right way, but please make a floor speech in favor of this pro-environmental bill, or please speak against this bill on the floor. Lawmakers have a lot of issues that they have to deal with, so they're going to pick and choose their battles. But if they're hearing from enough constituents that we want you to not only vote the right way, but be a leader in your caucus, in your House Democratic caucus, in your Senate Republican caucus, that's another thing. So the point I'm trying to make here, it's all about a spectrum. In some cases, we want to prevent the lawmaker from making a bad decision. In other cases, we want them to make a good decision. In other cases, we want them to not only make a good decision, to be a real leader on a piece of public policy. So I hope that answers your question, Connie. And then Molly asks, please share your next to last slide on your Facebook page again. I need to see that one again. I will be happy to do that in just a second. I want to make sure that I haven't overlooked any question. And if I have, it's purely because of my not catching it, not because I'm trying to ignore it. So let's see here. Okay, it looks like I've answered all the questions in the chat, the Zoom chat. Let me make sure I've answered all the questions on Facebook. It looks like, well, I will honor your request, Molly, to look at the slide, which I believe I know you're the one you're talking about. So, okay. Bear with me while I get to that slide. Thank you for staying with us. Okay, I think this is the slide you were talking about, Molly. So once again, we're dealing with very tough realities in the Indiana General Assembly. With respect to gerrymandering, which is a serious problem in our state, it's so important for us to spread the word about the Citizen Redistricting Commission's findings. And what I'm talking about here is because the legislature denied any bills that would have created an independent redistricting commission, a bunch of citizens came together, led by Common Cause Indiana and led by the Coalition for Independent Redistricting Reform, which Hoosier Environmental Council is a part of. They came together to create their commission of their own, a very credible bipartisan commission. It was a tripartisan and involved Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And they just wrapped up their very methodical work, soliciting input from across the state. And now they've released their findings to the public and to legislative leadership. And the hope is that this may influence how map making is done when the legislature convenes in the fall. So please spread the word about those redistricting findings. We'll share those on social media tomorrow if you can't find those through Common Cause Indiana. The second problem we face in Indiana is no campaign finance limits, specifically for individuals. If you're a big money person affiliated with a special interest, you can give as much money as you want to a state representative candidate or state senator candidate. No campaign limits there. So what do you do in that backdrop? build a meaningful, trusted relationship with your lawmaker. Even if that lawmaker may be a person that you see as the opposite side of the spectrum, build that relationship anyway. I can guarantee you that there is one issue that you can find common ground on when it comes to the environment. Similar solution to the problem of there being part-time legislative staff, build a meaningful, trusted relationship with your lawmaker. I want to give a shout out, for example, to Leslie Webb, who is both the longstanding president of Carmel Green Initiative and a very active volunteer citizen. And Leslie has built a trusted relationship with some of the lawmakers in Hamilton County, and they look to her as a go-to on environmental issues. She's an example of the power of building meaningful, trusted relationships with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Finally, there is no question that there is a large portion of lawmakers who are very ideological. They're anti-government, they're anti-regulation, et cetera, et cetera. But find a connection point with them. And again, I can guarantee you that there is some issue that they will resonate with you. Maybe it's because they've got a grandchild with asthma. Maybe it's because they live next to a polluted lake and they're appalled that it's a polluted lake. Maybe it's because they have a niece or nephew that has facing asthma that seems to be attributed to some pollution issue. You can always find a common thread with them. So I'll leave it at that the potential for organizing is absolutely limitless in Indiana. So even though the terrain is hard, the possibilities are enormous. With that, I'll conclude. Beverly, did you want to make any final remarks or?
I just appreciated your talk so much. So no, I don't have any more remarks, but I do want to thank you for being such a trooper and carrying on and doing the extra work for answering all the questions. I think you just did an excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Beverly. And thank you again to all of you who've tuned in through Zoom and through Facebook. I want to also express appreciation to, again, the League of Women Voters, Elkhart County, the League of Women Voters of South Bend, all the environmental groups who've helped promote this event. Jenny Jenkins, our Senior Special Coordinator, for fielding a number of comments through Facebook. And once again, please stay tuned on facebook.com/HECWeb, as well as twitter.com/HEC/_ED for future events that we'll be holding, of course, in partnership with great groups like the League. Wish you all well. Hope you stay safe and healthy, and look forward to see you in a future presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse.